All right, welcome everyone to the webinar on Zoom and also to our Instagram live chat. And we're here to discuss, or really and truly, we are here to get some ideas and thoughts from Dr. Charles Omole. First of all, let me say this. The reason why I've invited Dr. Charles Omole here is intellectual that I trust, his intellectual capacity. And the second thing is I understand he is a committed Christian. And he is sold out towards the furtherance of the kingdom of God on this earth. Some of you might be finding out today for the first time we were roommates in University of Lagos, so I have known him for over 30 years. So I know what I'm talking about, all right, in terms of that. So we'll be discussing, or he'll be sharing his thoughts on the Company and Allied Matters Act, which has created a lot of discourse as it relates to churches. That's what we are discussing and NGOs this evening, and the section of that particular act or law that has created some measure of disturbance in our polity today. So we want to get his thoughts on this and clear-cut legal clarifications. Now, I'll just do a formal introduction. Dr. Charles Omole is a lawyer, a security consultant, trainer, and strategist to businesses and governments across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Also a constitutional law scholar. He brings together an excellent academic and research pedigree and practical industry experience in a compelling proposition. He has managed and delivered over $2.5 billion in transformation program budgets across the globe over the last 25 years. He is a global expert in law and organizational transformation fields. A first-class strategist and trainer, Dr. Omole is a world-renowned expert in matters relating to personal, corporate, and national security operations, institutional good governance, legal strategy, entrepreneurship, and leadership development. He has worked in over 40 countries and advised many nations on developmental matters alongside his many global business interests. Dr. Omole also sits as a judge in the London circuit of the British judiciary in both the Crown and Family Courts. Rarely have the academia, industry, political, and government proficiencies be effectively combined in one single individual. He is also the Director General of the Institute for Police and Security Policy Research, an independent African-focused research institute to promote collaborative research programs and opportunities between the police, military, security practitioners, the academia, and industry experts across the African continent. With his wide-ranging experience in economics, business, finance, technology, organizational change, politics, the judiciary, national security, policing, human capital development, and leadership coaching, Dr. Omole combines an incredible, vast and versatile range of expertise in operational management, enterprise development, leadership, corporate transformation, personal development, strategic change management that makes him a formidable consultant and sought-after advisor around the world. He's a best-selling author of over 40 books on policing, politics, law, national security, leadership, and faith matters. Okay, so that puts him in a very qualified position to speak this evening. Now, I'll just read out my own personal monologue concerning this, and then I'll throw it over to Dr. Omole. All right. Now, we're here to discuss basically the relationship between the church and the state as pertains to this CAMA, the new law that has been enacted. And what I want to say is the church and the state, how laws govern both, and what to do when and where conflict arises. And I'm speaking here as a minister of the gospel of Jesus. The church has its own governance structure. The purpose of a governance structure within a church is to regulate the functioning of the community of faith and the conduct of its component members. Such purpose is realized in a number of ways, and there are three I'm going to say. Number one, by God through direct revelation, by the church as in its leadership. When the body of leadership comes together, this is how they administer governance, through an internal mechanism where they are faced with challenges. They come out with policies, right, out of the scriptures through which they will govern that particular entity called the church. And the third is the state, by the state, through secular legislation. In other words, what the state passes as secular legislation also affects the way and manner in which a church is governed. The governance structure is concerned primarily with order and discipline, and it derives its authority from the scriptures. That's a church. The institutional church has its own regulatory system of law, order, polity, dealing with doctrine, governance, worship, property, and finance. It translates the church's theological self-understanding into norms of conduct. Now, the church and the state's relationship. The state is instituted by God to promote and to protect the temporal and common good of society. It functions fundamentally different from the church. It does have a right to protect the citizens of a nation from material and bodily harm, while it upholds the fundamental human rights of each individual. There should be a separation between the church and the state, but the church should cooperate with the state in matters of common concern. However, when the state passes legislation that the church believes infringes upon its fundamental rights, or based on perceived moral decadence in a society that is now legislated upon, then a problem can arise. When this conflict occurs, the church and the state must engage with one another in matters of common concern. Let me, however, close by saying this. The church must know that to be effective in any society we operate in, public trust is a must. You can't influence a people whom you have lost their trust. Evangelism goes beyond just knocking on doors. Public trust is a sacred thing and one of the most powerful tools for evangelism. This is why Paul told Timothy to only appoint those who have a good report with them that are without, that is outside the church, into positions of leadership to maintain public trust. He also said we should provide things that are honest in the sight of God and also in the sight of men. So we've come to a crossroad where today the church does believe that their rights, all right, are being infringed upon in terms of, and we'll get into it, in terms of the law that has been passed. So I believe that now I'll turn it over to Dr. Omole to speak on this, to enlighten us. Journalists, I'm going to stand now as a novice. I'm going to ask question as a complete novice here, all right, and then I'll ask questions as concerns of people. All right, so Doctor, all right, thank you. First of all, I must thank you for coming on from your very busy schedule. All right, I hadn't seen you in almost 25 years or so. We met again and clicked off. So I want to thank you very much for honoring this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, what I want to do, I think, is to give, first of all, an overview of my impression of the new Companies and Allied Matters Act. And in giving my overview, I will also be referencing not just the new act, but also the old one, that the 1990 Act. Because part of the challenge, I think, in this is that a lot of people actually did not or do not realize that government always had power over incorporated trustees, even under the 1990 Act. It's just as this new 2020 Act elaborated a bit more on it. Now, first thing I want to say is this. There are two models of regulating what I call, so that I don't want to use legal jargons, let me use the word charity, to make it easier, instead of constantly saying incorporated trustees. So charities or NGOs, not-for-profit organization. There are two models of regulation globally. The first model is you have an organization such as the Corporate Affairs Commission, or in the UK, you have what you call the Companies House, that regulate both the for-profit businesses and the not-for-profit organizations. So both are regulated by one agency of government. That's one model. The second model is the model that, for example, is used in the UK, where a separate regulatory body is created for the not-for-profit sector. That's in the UK, we call it the Charities Commission. So Charities Commission and what we call the Companies House in the UK are the same. It's just that one regulates business that are for profit, the other regulates not-for-profit. So that's the second model. So it's either it's separated into two separate regulators, or it's combined under one regulator, as it is in Nigeria. So that's the first thing to say about that. That's the first one. The second thing is that under the 1990 Act, which we've always been using until this one, the Commission, actually under Section 691 of that Act, always had power to dissolve a charity. Under Section 691, it says that a corporate formed under this part of the Act may be dissolved by the court on a petition brought by the enlisted people who can bring the petition, and one of those people is the Commission. So under the Act that was in existence before this new one, the Commission always had the power to bring a petition asking if, since we are using that as an example, a church to be dissolved. That power always existed. So it's nothing new about that. It's just that, so people need to understand, therefore, that this is not completely new powers. It's just, they've just elaborated it a little bit. My third comment is that this is a very poorly drafted act. For those who have been familiar with my commentary on many of the acts that have been coming out of the National Assembly over the last decade, one of my major concerns is they are poorly crafted. They leave gaps, they leave lacunas, and you ask yourself, who on earth wrote this act? So I will mention a couple of areas where I have problem with the drafting of the act. So the section I think is of major concern for churches, NGOs, is section 823 to section 838 of the CAMA 2020. But if you look at the CAMA 1990, you find that a lot of section 673 of the old act to 690 were actually copied over into the new act. So these new sections in the 2020 Act is a combination of the old Act, the 1990 Act, and some additions. I was reading the press statement this morning that was given out by the Corporate Affairs Commission, and they did admit in that press statement that quite a few of the elements in terms of management of the incorporated trustees was copied from the UK Charities Commission Act. So again, our typical copy and paste problem in Nigeria, where we copy something from another, so they admitted in that press statement that it was, I think they were saying that more to say what we are doing is not, is something others have done. So they admitted they copied, part of it. But the issue here really is, I think what we need to focus on here is Section 839 of the new Act empowers the Commission to suspend trustees of an association and appoint interim managers to manage the affairs of the association where it reasonably believes, and then the Commission, I don't want to start reading every list, the conditions under which. Now, the biggest worry of all this is the subsection 3, which says public interest. Because everything else is, okay, if there's been misconduct, people understand that, protection of property of the association, people understand that, but the third one now says public interest. Now, for those who are into public, constitutional jurisprudence, you understand that public interest is a very difficult thing to define. It's almost like a huge, there's even no effective definition of public interest. The way public interest is portrayed in jurisprudence, it's more determined by who are constituted to determine what the public interest should be, and the process of determining what is in the public interest. So those are the two ways to actually get this. Now, you mentioned something earlier in your monologue, and that has to do with the lack of trust between government and the people. For me, I think the biggest problem here is that lack of trust. As a result, everything is viewed with suspicion. But to put my mind to rest, the way I want to portray this is this. There are 4 layers to this particular legislation that affects churches. The first is, it says that a trustee or 20% of members can bring a petition against a church. In the old 1990 Act, instead of 20%, it was 50%. So they reduced the threshold. So, that's not a big difference, but that's a small difference. So, which means, watch this, which means for a church to be found culpable, the following must happen. Number 1, either a trustee of the church or 20% of its members, or those, will bring a petition that something wrong is going on. That's number 1. The commission receives that petition, and they will examine that petition and agree that, okay, something wrong is going on. So that's second check. Then, according to, which many people are not aware of, according to, the section 389, subsection 11 of the new act, before the petition, so the first one is a trustee of member, 20% of members. Second is the commission. Third, when the commission now decided, okay, there is a case to answer by this organization, the law in subsection 11 of section 389 says the commission must get the express permission of the federal minister in charge. So the federal minister in charge will also now be told, okay, we're about to do X. So each will look at the paperwork and say, okay, there's a case to answer. And finally, the commission now will now have to go to court. And then the judge will now look at the petition again and say, okay, there's a case to answer. So that's 4 categories of people that have said something is wrong. Either your trustee or 20% of your member, they say something is wrong. The commission agrees that something is wrong. The federal minister agrees that something is wrong. If a judge, federal high court, agrees something is wrong. So can everybody be bought? I know we are cynical in Nigeria. That's a problem. Can everybody, all those people now, all ganged up against one church? And the reason I think why they inserted that subsection 11 that say a federal minister, the minister must give his approval, is because they understand the political dimension of such a decision. So the minister can't claim it. So the minister has to give his go ahead. Is my point. Before this comes, so that is 4 layers. That is there. The individuals from within the church, the commission, the minister, and the courts. So all 4 must agree something is wrong before the issue of, sacking trustees and appointing interim managers come in. And once interim managers are appointed, the act says they cannot exceed 12 months. So this is all has to be done within that window. Now, I'll come in a moment to the areas that are of concern to me in terms of the implementation. But, in terms of conflict, when I say this is poorly drafted, there's some conflict within the act. For example, subsection 2 of section 389 says that a court must be approached, and it cannot be an ex parte order because it has to be on notice. All the parties have to be involved. So a court is the only person that can suspend a trustee and appoint interim managers. But then subsection 7 of that same act contradicted subsection 3 by saying the commission can do it. So this is probably where the problem lies in terms of people interpreting it. So if you look at subsection 7 of section 389, that did not make it. It says the commission can do it, and that says or the court. Whereas subsection 3 made it clear that nothing can be done without the court. So which one is it? That's first conflict in the way it's drafted. The second conflict is that under subsection 3, it states that the remit of the interim managers in terms of the function, what you will do, and all the parameters around it will be determined by the court. But then subsection 10 says the opposite, that that the commission determines the function and the remit of the interim manager. So which is it? So this is just too clear within the same section, contradiction within this poorly drafted act. And my take on that is a settled principle in equitable jurisprudence, that where there is a conflict in law, the conflict has to be interpreted in favor of defendants. So if, for example, an act says to be a police officer, you have to be 20 years old, and then two sections below that, it now says you have to be 25 years old to be a police officer. That's a conflict instantly there. And you are 20 years old and you go to court. The court will interpret the conflict in your favor, because the way it's looked at is that the executive cannot be allowed to benefit from its own incompetence. So if you are incompetent to draft a bad act that has conflicting provisions, the provisions will have to be interpreted in a way that favors the defendant. So in this case, I believe, therefore, that it is the court that can determine these things. Corporate Affairs Commission cannot just wake up and do this. And I think that is the major thing people need to understand here. This is not somebody waking up one morning and say, "This is what this is what we're going to do." If nothing else, the commission will have determined something is wrong. The minister in charge, who's a political appointee, will have determined that a case is there to be answered and given his go-ahead. Then the court will also make that determination. So in a way, I don't see this as onerous. Now, what can the church do? Yeah. Part of the challenge here is, there is nothing in law that says a church must register as an incorporated trustee. A church can determine to register purely as a company. ABC Church Limited, there's no law against it. But the difference is, if you're ABC Church Limited, you have to pay tax on your income. And if you are ABC Church Limited and you pay tax on your income, all this provision doesn't apply to you. Nobody can dismiss any of your board members. So it's almost like the church is trying to eat its cake and have it. But wait, I want to ask you, but people might also say that this could be a backdoor of trying to tax the church, because then the way of escape out of a draconian law is to give us some of your money, which is what they might be saying, might be what is going on here. Well, it's possible. For example, in the UK here, there are lots of churches that are no longer charities. They just register as a company, period. Wow. Oh, yeah, there are lots of them like that. So that way, they are not subject to all these charities commission, regulations. So it's a choice, is my point. But the point is this. Let me put it this way, because I think Nigerians are not looking at it this way. By being not for profit, by being tax free, it means if AB Church, for example, if the turnover of AB Church if AB Church was a business, will have attracted 1 billion naira in tax, assuming AB Church was a business, right? Yeah. If their turnover will have attracted 1 billion naira in tax. What the Nigerian government is saying is that because you are an incorporated trustee and you are for the public good, don't pay the tax. That's like Nigerian government giving you 1 billion naira.
Okay.
So you can't say, oh, thank you very much for the 1 billion, they don't have anything to say about how we do our business. You can't have it both ways, is my point. You know, you can't on one hand receive from the government by not paying tax, and then on the other hand say, government, what we do, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't work like that. Nigeria has to modernize. And people need to understand that government come, government go, statutes and laws remain. We can't oppose a fairly good legislation because a government is there that we don't like. What happens if in 3 years time a new government comes that we like? I mean, so what do? So you don't legislate for the government in power. You legislate for the good of the country. So I see, therefore, that people who have major concerns about this act, it is my observation, they are not basing it purely on the face of this act. They are basing it on some other information elsewhere. Let me give you a good example. If I go and meet a pastor, and the pastor tells me, you know what, I want to marry a second wife. And I say, how can you marry a second wife now? There's no basis for it. He said, I think I'm seriously thinking about it. He tells me that in confidence. 3 months later, the pastor go on his pulpit and preached that there's nothing wrong with having a second wife. Now, everybody else who hears him 3 months later are basing their decision on that message. But I'm going to base my own decision not only on that message, but also on what he told me 3 months earlier. So the issue here, what I'm trying to say here is, a lot of people might have heard things outside the CAMA legislation malaki that makes them suspect the government. Anyway, by the time you now add the CAMA into the mix, their suspicion level goes high. So that for me is what's going on here. And it is the responsibility of such leaders within the church, if they have evidence of other things outside the CAMA Act that should make us suspect the government, they should say so. Because if we have the evidence, then we can understand. But without any evidence, we can only go by what is written in this legislation. And what is written in this act, for me, is not a persecution of the church, as some try to make it. You see, my concern generally is this.
Oh, okay, but sorry to stop, but let me just say this. Now, this is sensitive, but let me just say that when you say it's not the persecution of the church, if the church has been living without any consciousness of regulation,
yes,
which in this country it has been going on. It's, you know, there's no consciousness, and suddenly you start talking regulation, then people could read it as a persecution of what we were doing. You understand what I'm saying here? Which also might be the interpretation, because I mean there has to be this part of, the clarity between government and state and church, because some people are saying now that what churches are insinuating is that no law can regulate them.
Exactly.
That's what they're saying, which that's we are above the law. Is what we want. But the question is, if inside, now this is quote unquote, somebody says we're a religious organization, and what we do is that we do human sacrifices, and they're killing people. I mean, the government has a right to
exactly. No. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I guess the issue here is the balance between knowing that government regulation is necessary, you know, and in most cases, even here in the UK, I would say about 90%. 90% is just my rough estimate of interventions in churches in the UK. 90% of intervention in charities, rather, have to do with financial and fiduciary responsibility, not the object of the charity.
Yeah.
So I don't have to name names. You can Google it. There are many of the big churches in the UK that are subject to this. And why interim managers was appointed and were being investigated, church continued as normal. Yeah. The Charity Commission wasn't saying this is a message you must preach. They were not interested in any of that. All they were interested in the financial management. So this is not this is not therefore controlling what you preach or what you say. It's purely about the financial management. But like I said, you can't take from the government, which is what we do. And by the way, because people have spoken to me in the last few days since they knew I was coming, and I remember somebody sending me a message complaining bitterly. He said, "Look, I have a school." This person said, he said he's based in Ibadan. He said he has a school, and the profit he makes from the school, he pays tax on. He said, but he knows down the road there's a church that has a school. They don't pay tax. So but they're offering the same service. So the church has benefit from government through this incorporated trustee status. You can't therefore say the government have no say in how how you run things. So there is enough check and balance from what I can see here. Now, what can happen here is what this act has done. It's the best way to make the Nigerians understand this is like, if you look at INEC, INEC is governed by the Electoral Act. So the Electoral Act is like this CAMA Act for Corporate Affairs Commission. But INEC also has its election guidelines that it wrote itself, which many court verdicts in Nigeria has given back into. So what the Corporate Affairs Commission needs to do here is to bring out operational guidelines that should we need to act based on this legislation provision, this is how we do it. For example, there are a few things that are not clear in the law. For example, if you appoint interim managers over a church, who pays their salary? Who pays their fees? The legislation is silent on that. Is it the government that appointed them? Or is it the charity that they oversee? Number two, if you want to appoint an interim manager over AB church, do you appoint Alaji AB as the interim manager for a church? You see where I'm coming from here? No, it's because the law is blank on all these things. So there are sensitivities that have to be, reflected here. So do you appoint an Alaji to be the interim manager over AB church? I mean, if they do that, it's technically legal, but it's a senseless move. So there are things in the operational guidelines and implementation that CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, can bring out to allay a lot of fears here. So they can say, this is how this will be implemented. And they will not put a lot more flesh into the, around the bones of things that are not clear in the legislation. This is how we're going to do this. This is what we'll do if this happens. And that, I think, will help to clear a lot of things and, put things, in perspective, so to speak, about it. So the way I see this going forward is, one of the words the Bible used to describe us is, we say we are a holy nation. If you remove the word holy and just focus on the word nation, you will understand, therefore, that we need to be structured in the way we operate things as church. If the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdoms of our God, how do we manage the kingdoms of this world if we are not orderly, if we don't understand process, if we don't understand accountability? You see, we need to understand that no law of man can vanquish the church. We need to understand that. Isaiah 33 verse 32 says, the Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. He will save us. So those three are the three elements of a government. The Lord is our judge, the judiciary. The Lord is our lawgiver, the legislature. The Lord is our king, that's the executive. He will save us. So we need to understand, therefore, that, no government on earth can vanquish the church. We should stop being afraid of things that men do as though they have the kind of power we think they have. So looking at this, constructively, I think what we need to do is focus on the implementation. Lobby for the implementation. Lobbying an act after it's been signed into law is a bit like, after the horse has bolted, we're now shouting. This is the law of the land. If it's going to change, I don't see this changing in this 9th assembly. Maybe the next 10th assembly might change it. I don't know. But this current one, I don't see this law changing. So rather than moaning about it, the question is, what do we do? Focus, target our attention on implementation. How can this be implemented for the benefit of society? And also we need to understand that although that is not the object of our discussion today, from personal experience, I know there are many NGOs in Nigeria that are being used purely to funnel funds from donors all over the world, and are not being used on the ground for what they are supposed to be used for. They will be captured under this legislation. There are so many NGOs that I know get millions from all kinds of foreign sponsors under the guise of we are doing this in Nigeria, and they don't do half of what they claim they do. They're just raking in the money. And government is just looking. So this is not just a church thing. It covers the entire non-governmental organization spectrum, so to speak, of which church is included. So I don't think, therefore, in my own legal opinion, that this, as badly crafted as it is, and by the way, it's just that, the focus is on the church angle. There are so many revolutionary and modern provisions in this act that helps businesses in Nigeria. A lot. In fact, it's like we just moved from analog to digital, literally speaking. So we should understand. And the section that deals with that affect churches here is a 606-page legislation. I don't think more than 5 pages is involved in what we are talking about here. So this is not drafted, I think, purely just to target church. So what we need, look, it's some of this is cultural. Some of this is cultural. On my computer right now, I can go to AB Church, I can go to any ministry in the UK, AB Church, and bam, on the Charities Commission website, I will know what's their turnover every year for the past 10 years. How much was the turnover? I will know. No, transparency, openly. It's not uncommon here in the UK for churches to have what we call Stewardship Sunday. That Stewardship Sunday, the pastor will come up and say, okay, in the last 12 months, these are the income of the church. This is how we spend. It's almost like annual general meeting. This is how we spent it.
But they'll tell you in Nigeria. Well, yeah. Okay, all right. Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is that transparency here. But in Nigeria, I don't think anybody knows what the turnover of their that everything is hidden. And that secrecy is what we need to change, so to speak. There has to be an element of transparency in some of the things we do, and I know there's a lot of churches, there's no research that's yet been done, but I delve to try and find it, to find how much government is actually losing in Nigeria, assuming all churches, all mosques, all whatever are taxed. How much would that bring in to the Nigerian government? I've not seen a research that quantifies it, but it would be right to say that would be tens of billions.
Okay, but let me just ask this here. You started out by saying that this law was a pure adaptation of something UK Charity Commission. It's almost like they lifted it and brought it here. So some of the argument of people is that, yes, you have that kind of thing. You can go in UK and you can get information about churches, but also information about every facet of governance can be open. So it's a society that is transparent and open.
That's correct.
All right. So I'm just putting out the argument of people here. So what they are saying is, even though it's a 600 and something page, it deals with all kinds of things, and the church own is just 5 pages, but they can say, well, if they feel they have been targeted, they can also now say that, well, how come you that are now becoming the judge and jury, you are not living by the principles that you are asking us, all right, to live by? That's because that will be the argument, you know, going forward, all right? I mean, if this could lead to a total transformation about every facet of governance, including the church, government, and non-governmental, it will be wonderful. All right, because everybody adapts it. But if you are not practicing that, if you they see you public officers spending money, they see you doing things that they cannot, you know, your salaries can't control, and then you bring out a law for them, then people have a tendency, you know, to say that, look, you are targeting us, because if you really believed in the rule of law, then you should be subject to the rule of law yourselves. That's the argument.
No. That is a fair argument. But then the question you have to ask yourself is, it's like you going to a doctor, you know, who is smoking, as he's talking to you, and doctor is saying smoking is bad for your health. I mean, does that make what the doctor say wrong? No. The fact that he's not obeying his own, you know, rules doesn't mean smoking is not bad for your health. You know, sometimes, you know, that's the point I'm making. So we don't say, oh, because you are smoking, so whatever you say about smoking, I won't listen to. No. You see, it's one of the major concerns, again, about the discourse, public discourse in Nigeria, is that we focus too much on personality and not on issues. You know, if I give you a quote now, and I say Buhari says this, all the people anti-Buhari will say that statement is wrong. Assuming they forget, 3 months later, if I bring out the same quote and I say Atiku says this, all the people who were against it 3 months ago will now be for it. So which means they were not engaging with the issues. They're engaging with the personality. So there's a lot of that. So the question we as a church need to ask ourselves here is that, is this healthy? Is this what we need as a governing church? You know, I think part of the difficulty here is the lack of what I call the kingdom perspective to church in Nigeria. You know, God is a global God. God is never local. You know, and we and the church need to see and think from the global perspective. So the question here is, you know, if in the book of Isaiah, the Bible says, you know, and it shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be exalted above all mountains and lifted above all hills. And the Bible says, and all the nations shall come unto it. And they shall say, let us go into the house of the Lord, that they may teach us their ways. So if scripture is actually to fulfill, the government, the world is supposed to come to church to learn best practice. That they may teach us their ways, not teach us their doctrine. So we are supposed to exemplify best practice. That the government said, look, if church is doing this, we better copy them and do the same thing. Not that we are shying away from all these things, you know, the way we are. I think it's a lack of understanding of the kingdom paradigm needed for a ruling church. For us to understand that governing element of church is what a lot of people do not understand. So it's purely about getting saved and, you know, going to heaven. That's all, you know, most people are looking at.
No, I agree with you. I'm just giving excuses. I mean, for example, I just don't want so that they won't say I'm side. But the truth about the matter is, like you said, 95% of these things is based on financial dealings.
Yes.
And even when we look at the scriptures in terms of how we handle finances, Paul himself, when they were collecting offerings, told them to appoint somebody from among them for the purpose of transparency. He said, so that you will see clearly how this money was spent in terms of it. So even if we go, which is what I was saying originally as a church, I want to devise policies, all right, on governance, then, and we go to the scriptures, when it comes to finances, transparency is something that is clear inside the scriptures. And like you said, second thing also is, I also personally believe that, I mean, if Jesus said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and give unto God what is God, there is no conflict. That means he instituted governance, he state. He instituted the church, and therefore there will be no conflict. I think that no conflict is what you just said here, that the church produces a standard that even government itself sees that, look, these people, all right. So I think it's just that, you know, people who have their own personal fears about hidden agendas, and you can't blame people if they are.
No. I absolutely I agree. I mean,
yeah, you
can't blame people with the kind of things that's happened in Nigeria. A country where a former Chief Justice was suspended based on an ex parte motion, brought pursuant to non-known rule of law, where due process is a challenge. I mean, no. I'm not living in Klakukula. I understand that. But I'm saying here that we know there's something I call the mystery of unjust law. You see, when Bible says all things work together for good, I tell people, I said, even unjust law can work for your good. So how do I mean? I said, look at the children of Israel. You see, they were praying that the dominance and the hegemony of Rome should stop. They don't want Rome to rule over Israel again. So they were praying. And in terms of basic human right, that was a good prayer. But God did not answer that prayer. Why? God needed Rome to be ruling over the children of Israel to fulfill his purpose. What do I mean? You see, the Israelites don't crucify themselves. Only Romans do. So if Rome was not ruling over Israel, Jesus would never have been crucified. And prophecy would never have been fulfilled. So God needed an unjust government, so to speak, in quote, to be in place for Rome to be able to do what Rome was supposed to do. So imagine if you had declared war on Rome rulership, during that period. God would not have answered that prayer. So there is a mystery of unjust government, where even things that look bad in the natural, God can still use it for his own purpose. So I don't see any reason for church to be afraid here. And when the other thing, when the Bible talks about the cleansing of the church, a lot of people look at that purely from a spiritual perspective. Yes, there will be a spiritual cleansing. Part of the cleansing of the church will be through government. If the church is to be cleansed, there's some element that God will do. There's some element that the environment you are living will do to cleanse the church, to force accountability, on church. For example, let me give a typical example. When the regulation was brought into the UK, one of the major problems that people were having was that, the Charities Commission will come to a church and say, this man ministered for only 1 hour. You gave him £100,000 honorarium. Even the Prime Minister doesn't have that. What are you talking about? And you're supposed to be a charity. How is that for public good? So they were challenging things like that. And the pastors I know were saying, these people are trying to deprive us from having faith. I said, no, listen, there's a way around this thing. It's not difficult. What the Charities Commission was against is money generally given for the general purpose of the charity. How it is spent matters to them. So what do churches do? After you minister, they created a different envelope. That's okay. If the ministry of Pastor Poju has blessed you, so now we want to take an offering for Pastor Poju, and write on the envelope the offering for Pastor Poju. If that offering raised £1 million and they give you the 1 million, nobody will question it, because the givers gave with that intent. So that's the clarity that this thing has brought into the UK. So whereas if I'm giving to church generally, what they are saying, that general offering has to be used for charitable purpose. So these things are nuanced. So they're not saying don't give 10 million or as an honorarium, so long as the people giving it gave it with that intention in mind. That's fine. So these are the clarity whereas where something that doesn't exist in Nigeria. So the point I'm making is this: the government is saying, for us not to tax you, you are there for public good. You are bringing some public good to the country. Therefore, we want to make sure, fiduciary-wise, that you are doing the right thing. And for me, I don't see any problem. There will have to be a change in the way we conduct some things. Some element of transparency might need to come in. That is true. But I don't see that as a problem. Because, Nigerians are full of contradiction. when it suits them, they want us to copy the West. You know, this is how they do it in the West. When it doesn't suit us, leave us as backward as we are. We don't want any Western innovation. Just leave us as we are. So we want to eat our cake and have it. Life is not like that. You know, as you move on in life, you know, everything else moves on with us. So this, I don't see any reason for any church to be afraid of this. And like I said, there's no law that says you have to be an NGO, that you have to be an incorporated trustee. You can just be a business, pay your tax, and you are completely out of the loop of these provisions of the CAMA Act. If a church chooses to do that. But if you remain as an incorporated trustee, you know, and the Nigerian citizens, because when you're talking about tax, it's not really Nigerian government, it's Nigerian people giving you billions or hundreds of millions in tax to say keep, then you cannot say they have no say in how you run your operation. It cannot work that way.
All right. I just want to tell folks on Instagram, we might go off, I think, in about 1 minute because 1 hour is gone. So I'll have to reconnect. All right. If that happens, they will count me out if it's going to happen so quickly. Because I now want to ask you some questions. First of all, politically speaking, yeah. You know, I just want to say this, that, for example, this bill has been going on, you know, and it's only when it now became a law that we now started shouting about it, at least, well, maybe very loud about it. So, and sometimes I think we have lived so long under the military system of government that sometimes we don't understand how the democratic institutions function. And even people who talk about the fact that, you know, believers should be engaged and the church should be engaged, some of the engagements, they might not consider them to be sacred. That's if we really want to participate in a democratic establishment. In other words, I mean, even to say this is even hard to say because people can misquote you and say, oh, this is what you say. But in some of these countries, interest groups have people in Washington that interact with legislators, and they are salaried to do that, to make sure every single thing going on, their interests, all right, are being protected in some of these things, and they have a seat at the table, all right, participating in some of these things. So what do you think, all right, in terms of the church, in our involvement because voting is the least power in democracy. When you say we're going to vote, they've already determined who you vote for. Either you vote for a man here or a man there. So you're just choosing between their men. So so how do you think we can get engaged in a very enlightened way in political process here to be able to nip some of these things in the bud? I mean, if we have to.
Well, I mean, you've just raised a topic that is close to my heart in terms of, where I want to see the church reposition itself. I think, the root of this starts with the traditional spiritual secular divide in the minds of a lot of believers, where they feel, okay, this is spiritual, this is, secular, so we need to separate it. But they don't understand that everything we do as people of God, everything is spiritual. It's like somebody asking me the other day, said me, he said, sir, I just got a job in Nigerian breweries. I said, okay, congratulations. He said, I just want to ask you whether I should accept the job. I said, why? He said, because they produce beer, and I'm a believer. Then I said, where do you work currently? He said, Federal Ministry of Works and Housing. I said, there are more demons where you are at the moment than at the Nigerian breweries. So don't, I use that to more and say, don't, caricature the word Nigerian breweries, so it's bad. Then Federal Ministry is good. The point I'm making generally is that we need to understand everything we do is spiritual. And, what, for example, can do. There's nothing wrong in CAN having a legislative monitoring unit. The people in Washington, what you just described, what they call lobbying. It's a legal, they have to be registered, they are lobbying, they know they are. That's what we should be doing. But this is the key. Now watch this. This is the key. We talk about Israeli lobby in Washington, tobacco industry lobby. One prerequisite for lobbying to work is unity of purpose. That is what the church in Nigeria doesn't have. You see, if you're talking about Israeli lobby, tobacco industry lobby, the gun lobby, there is a unity of purpose with, of objective. But when you have people scattered in 10 different directions, nobody agrees with anybody, how do you collectively lobby on behalf of people who are not united? So the challenge why the issue of the church having a collective voice has not happened is because we don't have a collective voice. One is saying this, the other one is saying that, the other one is saying that. So there's no, so it's important therefore for lobbying to work. There has to be unity of purpose. We have to transcend base, a doctrine. The Bible says until we come to the unity of the faith. The Bible didn't say unity of doctrine. Doctrine might be different, but we must have unity of the faith that binds us together and creates a platform on which you can then lobby government. That is what needs to be created in Nigeria. And we need to understand that. Take the Israeli lobby now, for example. It doesn't matter whether it is a Democrat that wins White House or a Republican, their power is undiminished. Their influence is undiminished. That is where we need to get to. We can't be, because this person is in this party or these people in power, okay, maybe the Christian voice will be heard. This party is not in power, Christian voice will. There's nothing like that. One thing that is quite clear in that country today, in Nigeria, nobody can win the presidential election without the Christian vote. Nobody. Nobody. Even if you win all the votes in the north, the Constitution says you must win in 24 states. You must get majority rather in 24 states to win the presidential election. So you can clear all the north if you all you like. They don't have 24 states there. So there is a basis for continuous influence of the church in perpetuity, is my point. If we learn to let go of petty things, focus on what binds us together, unity of the faith, not unity of doctrine, and then use that as a platform to create a legislative monitoring unit. It is easier, as people found out with the infectious diseases bill a few weeks back, it's easier to influence a bill while it's going through the National Assembly than to start complaining after the president signs it. And that is and in this case, that's what I think we failed at. If the church made as much noise as they're making now, when this was going through the National Assembly, exactly, this might have changed, exactly. So it's important that, and there's a basic thesis in law that says that it is not the duty of the law to grant you a right if you sleep on your right. So, which means the law won't say, for example, that is the basis of adverse possession regulations in common law countries. If you have a house and a squatter has been living in that house for 15 years, you've not sacked the squatter, you've not told the squatter to get out, you've not instituted any case against the squatter. The squatter, after X number of years, it varies from country to country, can go to court and claim the house. And the law will give him the house. It sounds unfair. But the way the law looks at it is that how can you yourself, the owner of the house, abandon your house for 15 years? So you slept on your right. It's not the duty of the court to give you a right that you have slept on. So we have to assert our rights. So in the same way here, we can influence a lot of legislation going on if we have a cohesive voice as Christians, and they need to have a legislative monitoring unit that monitor everything going on in the National Assembly and bring a Christian perspective to every legislation, not just CAMA. Every legislation, they should be bringing out almost like a paper to say, okay, this is CAN's position on this particular bill. This is CAN's position on this particular bill. We should be having down every single bill going through so that we are giving a Christian prism, so to speak, and pass our comments. That is not happening. We react haphazardly, lack of strategic coherence. And that is what's happening today. But I feel we have exaggerated, in my view, the potential impact of CAMA. I don't think so. I don't think it's the death nail on the church that many fears. No, I mean, it's not. Clearly, that we have to be a change of habit. We have to be more accountable as church. You know, the joke somebody gave was, he went to minister for somebody, and then they gave the pastor the offering when they were leaving, and then along the way, the wife said, only we need bread. Though. The pastor said, hey, open the offering basket, took money, and said, use that to buy bread. And then the guest minister said, is that not the church offering? He said, hey, we need bread now. Now, you see, that means that there's no difference between his church offering and his own personal money. You know, that is a common practice in many, not just in Nigeria, in many countries in Africa, where these things are not regulated. It shouldn't be like that. You know, it shouldn't be like that. There should be proper, you know, difference. And regulation, self-regulation, I think, is what I'm saying here, will help. So what I think can begin to do here is, as a body, can begin to help draft best practice for churches. To say, okay, you know, almost like plug and play templates. Okay, corporate governance, financial governance, you know, this are, you know, this one. So they create like a panel that will design, you know, best practice for churches, and then that is now shared among all CAM members. So it's okay, if you want to, you know, really organize your church with best practice, these are things you should do. These are the kind of accounts you should have. These are the separation of roles you should have, you know, and all that. So it's important that, you know, so CAN therefore can use that best practice to spread the gospel, so to speak, of good governance across all our churches. That's what I think we should be doing, because CAN themselves, or even Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria, will be the first to admit there are bad practices going on within the church, within some churches. We can't be stupid enough to say everybody is compliant. That's not true. So, but many of the people who are not compliant are not aware of what they should do. There are some who don't know any different. And that's why a body like CAN will help to say, okay, we think this is how we should organize your, you know, your things. You mustn't be maybe a signature to certain account. You know, this is what must happen. There must be a balance, checks and balance. There must be, you know, all that structure can be created. Why? Because if we step into the corporate world, all those structures are normal. And this is what I'm trying to say here. That if we are thinking as a governing church, we need to see that, you know, when you step out of church into government, it should make no difference, because you are used to doing things the right way. So we shouldn't almost like be in church and rot in being unaccountable, and then move into the corporate world. Suddenly, you know, we mess up because we don't know, you know, what to do. So this is a good opportunity for CAN to begin to design best practices, you know, for churches. Let them, you know, in terms of templates, let them adopt it, and that begins to make, you know, CAMA completely irrelevant in terms of, because if you have the right structure in place, CAMA becomes irrelevant, you know, in terms of, you know, any possible intervention by government.
Okay, just one last question. Thank you very much for all you've said. So one of the major things I've taken here is going forward, because it's the law of the land. Going forward, we must seek for clarification of guidelines and details of everything. All right. So how do you think we can do that?
Well, that, again, that can come through either of two ways. CAN or any other body can come together and draft a guideline and give it to CAC to say, okay, here's one we did earlier. I mean, for example, a few weeks ago, when the infectious diseases bill came out, you know, I felt that bill was not the right bill. So I went through the entire 70 pages of the bill. I drafted a new bill. I wrote my own 70-page bill, you know, making all the changes, and I put it out there. You know, within 2-3 days, you know, I got contact from somebody from the office of the speaker. By a week later, you know, I looked at my phone the moment I woke up, it was the speaker himself on my phone. You know, I don't want to discuss publicly what we discussed, but the point I'm making is that draft, that sample became the, you know, sort of baseline now that they can't go below. So rather than just complain, so we can draft a possible guideline to say, okay, okay, CAMA, okay, it's law, like you said, it's the law of the land. This is how we think you should implement it. It doesn't mean CAC we accepted hook, line, and sinker. But CAC might adopt 80% of it, because if it makes sense, it makes sense. So that's the first thing we can do, which is to, you see that we do that way, or we influence and lobby to have provisions in there. For example, like I said, the law doesn't say who can be appointed as, that doesn't mention it about the religion of the person who can be appointed as independent, oversight of a church. So which technically means Corporate Affairs Commission, like I said, can employ an analogy to be the, independent examiner over a church. Technically, that would be legal, but practically, that would be silly. So those are the kind of things I'm saying that, but also, like I mentioned, who pays the advisors, the independent advisors? Who pays them? We don't know, So, is it the church that will pay them? Or is it the government? The law is silent on, the act is silent on that. So those are the kind of things that, I think, we can lobby, by the way, in the UK, if the Charities Commission comes in and they employ independent experts, administrators to take over your church, as long as you have the money in your account that can pay them, it's the charity that pays. It's only if you have zero balance and you can't afford it, that's when the Charities Commission will step in and pay. So these are the kind of clarity. So which means, it sounds a bit of, so they're appointing independent people to look at, to examine your books, and yet you are paying for the privilege. That's the law here. But so clarity needs to be made, along some things. So we need to lobby in terms of the implementation. So two things, two action points here. Lobby in terms of implementation, either in terms of implementation guideline, either lobby directly or draft a copy that you can send to Corporate Affairs Commission to say this is the position of the church in terms of implementation. And secondly, the three things I'm going to say, that's the first one. The second one is that they need to create a best, almost like a best practice book of knowledge. It needs to be created by CAN or whatever, that churches can adopt on a plug and play basis to make sure they are compliant in terms of best practice. That saves different churches looking for different accountants to give them different design. So they have a good template. And then, so that's the second one. And then the third thing is CAN needs to have a legislative monitoring unit that constantly monitors everything happening in the National Assembly and have papers on everything happening. That's what we should be. There is a Christian, if people understand the kingdom perspective, there's a Christian perspective, there's a kingdom perspective to every legislation coming out of government. Every legislation. And that is what we need to be, that is where we need to arrive at. So those are the three action points, in terms of implementation guideline, best practice guideline for churches, and monitoring what happens in the legislature going forward.
Dr. Charles, thank you very much for your contribution. On Zoom, I tried to, let me see whether, if I turn on the comments a bit, let me see whether I will get any good questions. I've not seen any questions that have come. If there's any question.
And of course, along with the best practice being designed by CAN, will also be a training package as well.
Yeah,
to go with it. So exactly.
And even administrators of churches can attend the seminar and be trained, so everybody understands what it means to be in that particular position.
Absolutely. So for me, I think it's the best way to respond to this. It's already the law. It's already the law, so I'm not part of it.
It's already law. That's not really
There's not much we can do about that. That is not now, not in the immediate future.
All right. I think, let me just say, all right. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And thanks for having me, and keep up the excellent work you're doing. Blessings all. Thank you.